Welcome to the Craniosynostosis Learning Center. This is a birth defect in which one or more of the fibrous joints between the bones of your baby's skull close prematurely, before the baby's brain is fully formed. Here you will get a glimpse into the scary world that surrounds that 17-letter word. Like countless others, the first time that I heard this word was in the NICU hours after my daughter was born. Even after spending 10 years in the medical field, I had no idea what road was before us. But in the 9 years since, I have learned how amazing cranio kids are. My daughter was born with bicoronal cranio. In her 9 years of life, she has had 7 surgeries on her skull and face, as well as a few others. September is Cranio Awareness Month. I built this to last long past that short month. After all, it will be a part of my life for the rest of it, and my daughter's as well. Every dollar that I make on Twitch for the month of September goes with my additional donation in October to Cranio Care Bears. The other months all go to Extra Life to support the hospital where she has all of her care, surgeries and more. I strongly recommend you check them out. CranioCareBears.org. They send 110 to 150 care packages every month to families that have a child going through a craniosurgery and are funded only by donations and through programs like Amazon Smile. Head up the stairs and pick a direction. Check out the books and learn. When you are done there, head into the mouth of the skull and learn some more when you go into the cranial vault, top of the head. You can also feel free to ask me any questions on YouTube, Twitch, or even find answers on my 10 years worth of a blog. I am CranioDad everywhere, even my own website, CranioDad.com. I hope you learned something that helps you peer behind the curtain into the world that I have been in with my amazing daughter. Thanks for coming by. Stay safe and much love. My topic, suture. My topic, synostosis, is one of the rarer forms of craniosynostosis. It affects males more than females. The mitopic suture is located between the soft spot and the nose. It is associated with trigonocephaly. This means that the shape of the head is triangular, narrow in the front but broad in the back. It intersects the coronal, indicated in purple, and sagittal, indicated in red, sutures to form the anterior fontanel, aka the soft spot on the baby's head. The closure of this suture will cause a ridge to form down the middle of the forehead. This will also make the forehead more pointed and make the eyes appear closer together. Left coronal suture. When only one side, unicornol, is affected, this is the second most common form of cranio. In fact, about 15% of all cases of isolated cranio cases are unicornal. It affects mostly 72% females. The name means the crown of the head. Closure will cause an elevation of the eye socket, flattening of the ridge of the eye on the affected side, and displacement of the nose. Bicoronal is far more rare and complex. You can learn about that in the other purple area. Random facts. Cranio affects 1 out of every 2,500 live births in the United States, often without a known cause. The golden standard for diagnosis is a CT scan. It is often diagnosed between birth and the age of 6 months. The early closure of the suture or sutures can cause many problems. This depends on the sutures that close, the number, and if the brain has room to grow. We have advanced a great deal in the last 40 years in how we treat cranio. However, if left untreated, cranio can cause serious issues, even death, as the brain struggles to find space to grow. Positional plagiocephaly is not craniosynostosis. It is a common and somewhat benign cause of skull deformity. Further, all the sutures are still open. This is most often caused when a baby sleeps on one side for the first few months of life. It will almost always self-correct, but can be aided along with the use of a special helmet. There are many surgeries and even special helmets that can be used to correct shape and create room for the brain to grow. You can learn more about some of the treatments by going into the skull below and heading up to the cranio vault. There are 2,464 glass blocks that make the floor of this entire circle. If the blocks are births, this one represents one with cranio. FYI, there are about 385,000 babies born each day. Lambdoid suture. Lambdoid is one of the rarest types of craniosynostosis. Most cases, 85%, are unilateral, one side closed. This usually causes asymmetric posterior plagiocephaly, causing one of the sides of the skull to appear more tilted. If both sides are affected, even more rare and called bilambdoid cranio, the skull will appear more tunneled towards the back and wider than usual. This can be misdiagnosed as positional plagiocephaly, which is defined in the general area to the west. Sigato suture. Sigato is the most common, 40 to 58%, form of craniosynostosis. It also affects males more than females at a ratio near 4:1. Early closure results in scaphocephaly. This is where the cranial vault, the inside of the skull, has a boat-like shape. It is narrowed and elongated towards the front of the skull. Though it may be the most common form of isolated non-syndromatic cranio, it is one of the least common forms of associated syndromatic. In fact, systemic associations with Sigato are so sparse that syndromes only are found in about 35% of those tested. Right coronal suture. Isolated bicoronal cranio is rare. Only about 8% of isolated cases. Isolated is another way of saying non-syndromic, or that there has not been a syndrome genetically linked as the cause of the cranio. When both sides fuse, not only are the effects noted in the other purple area present, but they are present on both sides of the face. Further, the skull will grow to be tall, towering, and wide. This is known as brachycephaly. This is the type of craniosynostosis that CranioDad's daughter has. Bicoronal almost always requires surgery. You can learn about the different surgeries by entering the skull below when you are done up here. A strip craniotomy is typically performed in conjunction with a pediatric neosurgeon. During this procedure, a section of the child's skull is removed. This is done to relieve pressures within the skull and allow room for future growth. This piece is often discarded, and a future surgery may be needed to perform a reconstruction using artificial bone. The procedure takes approximately 2 to 3 hours. After surgery, the child will stay at the hospital for recovery. Most children stay for an average of 3 to 5 days. Once recovery has started, it is likely that follow-up surgeries will be scheduled as the child needs them. To see an area typical of this surgery, look up and look for the blue outlined area. Open cranial vault remodeling is one of the oldest and most common procedures used to treat craniosynostosis. The key feature of this type of surgery is that it requires complete removal of the skull bones from the outer covering of the brain to remodel or reshape the head in the area of deformity. The main goal of open cranial vault remodeling is to overcorrect the skull to treat or to reduce the risk of developing increased pressure in the skull. This allows the brain to grow and improves head shape. After the bone is removed, the bone is reshaped and expanded. This is done by removing portions as well as hundreds of very shallow micro cuts into the bone to increase flexibility. The reshaped skull is bolstered with a cranial bone graft and secured in place with resorbable plates or sutures to provide more room for brain growth and improvement in head shape. The surgery takes approximately 3 to 7 hours, sometimes more, followed by a hospital stay of 4 to 5 days for post-operative monitoring and recovery. You will notice of the 4 surgeries described here, this one does not have a color area for you to look for. That is because this surgery can be performed just about anywhere in the skull. Cranio's daughter has had it on the top, back, and crown of her head. Distraction osteogenesis is a biological process that promotes bone formation between cut surfaces of bone segments, while continuous traction is applied to separate the bony fragments. The goal of distraction osteogenesis is to make bones larger. The surgery uses the body's ability to heal bones to generate new bone where it is needed. Distraction osteogenesis is a technique in which cuts are made in bones and specialized devices, distractors, are placed. Healing can begin, and then the distractors are turned or activated to move the cut ends of the bones away from one another, slowly over time. This creates new bone in the gap and allows for generation of new bone and repositioning of the bones also. This procedure uses specialized devices called cranial distractors to move the bones of the back of the skull very slowly. Cranial distraction allows for more significant reshaping and expansion of the space inside the skull by slowly stretching the scalp over time. Ask CranioDad while he is streaming to show you the very tool used for his daughter's distraction. He has it next to him at his desk as a constant reminder. For Cranio's daughter, the distractors were placed on either side of the head. Look in front of and behind you for the black outlined areas with a gap for a rough area of where hers were placed. Fronto orbital advancement is a surgical procedure used to reshape and reposition the bones of the forehead and the eye sockets. Fronto orbital advancement is commonly used to treat unilateral coronal synostosis, bilateral coronal synostosis, and metopic synostosis, because these forms of craniosynostosis all cause changes in the shape of the forehead and upper portion of the eye socket that result in an abnormal appearance. Fronto-orbital advancement is usually performed between 9 and 12 months of age. The deformity of the forehead and eye sockets varies based upon which cranial sutures have closed prematurely, but the goal of the fronto-orbital advancement is to restore normal contour to the affected areas. The skull bones requiring reshaping are removed with a Neurosurgeon. The contour of the skull bones and the upper portion of the eye sockets are made by hand. After reshaping, the skull bones are reattached to the skull with dissolvable sutures and plates. The purple outlined area in front of you is the typical area reshaped for this surgery. We have now come to the end of our tour. I would like to give CranioDad a big shout out for building this wonderful place for us to learn about craniosynostosis. Be sure to check out his channels, links will be in the description, and if you'd like to take a tour of his base for yourself, the world download to our Hearthcraft Season 2 map will also be available. Thank you so much for watching. Hope that you learned something along with me.